What's up, everyone on the World Wide Web? Today we are talking about what makes a character interesting, what makes a character likable, and what makes a character relatable.
Hey, Viral Thoughts followers. My name is Riley. I'm Jesse's friend of days of yore, and when Jesse told me about the idea of what we were going to be discussing, I got real excited because I think all three of these aspects are super important to what makes a character good, what makes them entertaining, which is, once again, if they are interesting, likable, and relatable.
Yeah, let's talk about what makes something interesting. I think first off, the genre really plays a huge part into who the character is and what makes that interesting.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, you wrote down Gandalf. Gandalf's interesting because he's a wizard. I mean, you can't get. I mean, that's interesting.
Yeah. I feel like in the genre, especially in fantasy, like there's always going to be something interesting because it's not like real life. It's something totally different. So genres like fantasy, sci-fi, the superhero movies, all of those are going to be interesting regardless, just because the world that they're in is not like our world. And so it's going to be more interesting than, say, a drama, or at least for those of us who are fans of fantasy and sci-fi and stuff. I mean, dramas and rom-coms and different things like that are still you're still going to have interesting characters, but it's harder for movie makers to make those characters more interesting per se, just because the genre itself is still just real life. So you're going to have to work harder to make those characters more interesting. Whereas just because it's sci-fi or because it's fantasy, already the characters are going to be interesting because they're not part of this world.
Exactly. Yeah. So interesting. I think going to an interesting character would be when you have exaggerated characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
So there's things like, you got Sherlock Holmes, who is just this like savant of knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's interesting because he's so exaggerated. Now fantasy, obviously, you go to like hobbits who are short, and very homey.
And even in there are. So we all know that J.R.R. Tolkien was a proud Englishman and loved the culture of England, and the hobbits are a manifestation of Englishness. They love the comforts of home and the good tilled earth, as the movies talk about, and peace and quiet, and it just makes them so interesting because it's like we've discussed in the last video. You take that trait and you dial it to 11, and and the hobbits, they are interesting because they're an exaggerated form of something we're already familiar with, and that's what makes the whole culture of the hobbits in the Shire and Hobbiton so interesting. Is that comfort is such an important part, and you can see that I think Peter Jackson did an awesome job in the movies of seeing the visuals there with what the hobbits look like, and their homes just look so cozy and so warm and nice, and the Shire is so green and the rolling hills. It just looks like a nice place to live, and that's a very interesting setting.
And you get interesting characters that come from interesting settings.
Yeah.
That's very important, is the setting that the character comes from. Should we move on to likable? Any more thoughts on interesting?
No, I think that we pretty much nailed down what we were trying to discuss, is a character has to be interesting in order to be a good character.
So the other aspect is likable. Character needs to be likable. This, for me, it has to be people. They have to have some kind of good morals, if that makes sense. Like they have to be honest or happy, or there's something they're good. They have good characteristics. They're like, okay, I'm rooting for this guy because he tries hard. You know, even though he's a flawed character, maybe he's despite all that, he's a good guy.
Yeah, I think being the good guy is what makes what kind of defines that character as a good character, because you kind of know what their motives are, and we as people kind of like predictability, and so that having that good guy as your protagonist is usually what we kind of are expecting with lots of movies. You have some shows that will have a character be a bit more morally ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, for me, I don't find that trait to be nearly as likable.
Interesting, yes.
Interesting, yes, but not nearly as likable. Just because I don't know, like I don't know exactly if I'm supposed to be rooting for them or not,
Mhm.
and I'm used to rooting for the good guy. You
Yeah.
know, I do believe though that you can have good or you can have likable characters that aren't necessarily the good guy.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about that at the end of our discussion about bad guys that can be likable.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. And so any other traits that makes characters likable for you? I mean, I'm thinking, I like my characters to be good at something.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they're good at, if they're a tech guy or the hacker, or if they are, they need to be good at something. In my
They have
opinion.
some sort of skill set that
Mhm.
makes them almost endearing to you in a
Mhm.
sort of way. Yeah. We were discussing a little bit ago about Harry Potter, and we
Yeah.
feel like, sadly, in the movies, Ron kind of gets a bad rep because, for those who've read the books, we know that Ron is not just a one-dimensional goofball, friend. Yeah, because in the movies, he kind of comes across as a bit dumb sometimes, and they give a lot of what Ron does in the book. They give that credit to Hermione in the movies, and that makes, whereas in the book, you know that Hermione is flawed, and
Her knowledge is flawed.
Her knowledge is flawed. Sometimes she's super smart, and she's you root for her, and she's got a lot of knowledge. But sometimes there are things that she doesn't understand, and those
Culturally
in the magic wizarding world, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got Ron though, who was born in the wizarding family, and so in the books, he's got something he's good at. He's good at knowing what's going on in the wizarding world, where sometimes Harry and Hermione don't. Whereas in the movies, they kind of make it seem like Hermione's a know-it-all about everything, even wizard culture stuff, and that Ron somehow is an idiot, even though he was born and raised a wizard. So, like, I just think that they kind of did not give enough credit to Ron in the movies, and like you said, for a character to be likable,
they need to be good.
They have to be good at something. Yeah. Like, and even Neville is good at herbology. That's the one thing. And so you're rooting for him. You're like, yeah, you got this, man. At least you got that one thing that you're good at.
Thing going on.
And so I'm with you there. I think that the being good at something makes someone likable. Also, I think for me, another trait that makes a character likable is that they've got a sense of humor of some kind. Because when you've got a main character or any character really that is just so straightforward, and they just become boring and static, like even certain characters that are more reserved can still have a bit of a sense of humor to them, like Legolas in Lord of the Rings or something like that. He's very elegant and prideful, and a bit more upper class, being an elf and everything.
The quote, "Could have picked a better spot."
Yeah.
Should I describe it to you?
Yeah.
Or should I get a box?
Should I get you a box? Yeah, like lines like that are just memorable and funny, and he's got a good sense of humor. But then you've also got characters like Merry and Pippin or Fred and George from Harry Potter that are just mischief makers, and they're fun and they're likable.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to relatable. Relatable character. Being able to see yourself in that character. What makes a character relatable for you?
Well, relatable, I feel like, can be good and bad. Like, there's things that we all can relate with, that we see ourselves in that character. Like, oh yeah, I've had that that experience, or I've been able to make that good trait is something I can relate with. But there's also bad traits too, like we're something that makes Frodo Baggins, the main character of Lord of the Rings, relatable, is that we've all had responsibility thrust upon us that we didn't ask for. And that's why Frodo's such a good character to have, because he didn't ask for the ring. It just came to him, and now he's got to deal with it. How many times have we in life been like,
well, I have to deal with this now.
Yeah, like, this is not something I ever would have asked for, but now I have to deal with it because of the decisions of other people, and that's something that Frodo has to deal with. But there's also a somewhat a trait in him that we can relate with. For example, when he kind of stabs Sam in the back and goes with Gollum on the long staircase,
past the spider,
to the giant Shelob spider. We've all had times too where we've picked the wrong friends, and we look at that and we're like, ugh, we cringe a bit because
it's relatable.
It's relatable, yeah. And so you have that, but then you also have Sam. We've also had the times where we've been stabbed in the back by someone and we feel betrayed or something like that, and hopefully not in the same level of Sam and Frodo, but like we've been there and had those times. So you have Sam being relatable now. So like I feel like once again the Lord of the Rings does a great job of making characters relatable.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, like the circumstances that the characters are put in, like for instance their parentage. I'm thinking of Aquaman, right? Aquaman, in at least the recent movie, he is the product of
two worlds,
like, are kind of like divorced parents, if that makes sense. So like he relates to those people who are having to deal with divorced parents, like that's part of their life. So Aquaman can relate to that, or people who watch the movie should be able to relate to Aquaman because they have parents that are split up. So I think circumstances like that can help a character be relatable. And it's also interesting how likable seems to be always kind of good, but relatable can be both good and bad.
Yeah,
it's not necessarily always a good thing that you can relate to something, like you mentioned. So,
and maybe right now we can kind of talk about how, for example, we were talking about Black Panther,
yes,
and how certain characters can be relatable, even though they're the bad guy.
Yeah, bad guys.
They're often we think of like, oh, bad guys are unrelatable, and there are certain bad guys. For example, the one Justice League. If anyone saw that atrocity,
Steppenwolf.
Steppenwolf, is that the name? Yeah, I don't even know. Like, because he was not relatable. All he was a big nasty bad guy that was like,
he's got to die.
Yeah, so typical. Yeah, you look at you take one look at him and you hear one thing he says and you're like, well, clearly that guy's the bad guy and the good guy should kill him. Like, like I know that there's nothing there. He has no moral anything. He's just pure evil. And so you're just like, well, then I don't even care about him at all. Whereas you've got an awesome bad guy in the form of Killmonger in Black Panther, played by Michael B. Jordan, who does an awesome job.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree.
Oh yeah, just phenomenal. And he is relatable because his motives actually make sense. Like, you don't look at him and he's not just pure evil.
Well, he's got the real world issues.
Yeah, and he's got a good motive behind him. He has good reasons for doing what he's doing because injustices have happened, and so he wants to make those things right. Now, what I think makes him good or bad is the means by which those goals become accomplished.
He's motivated by anger, and his tactics are violent.
Exactly, yeah. And those are the things that we as a society find disdainful, and that's what makes him the bad guy. But it makes him super compelling. Like, we have T'Challa as Black Panther, and there's times in the movies where you're like, wait, is T'Challa right? Like, or is he wrong? Like, because Killmonger's making some pretty good claims here, things that make sense. But then you realize, oh wait, T'Challa's rational. T'Challa wants, peace, and there's other ways to achieve those goals without violence and without corruption and murder and things like that. And so that's why we're able to see T'Challa as the good guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think also, so I've been watching Avatar: Last Airbender.
Oh yeah,
last couple of days. Yeah. Zuko is one of my all-time favorite characters, and he's relatable.
He's awesome
because he's coming from a culture that's violent, and he's been raised with lies, basically.
Yeah.
And with all those lies, he's still trying to do what's honorable. And I think that, I think all of us have been misled in some way or another. Like, we have to come to terms with how we've been raised.
Yeah.
So, and we see that in Zuko. We see that, okay, I was raised this way. How should I live my culture? How should I respect my culture, and how can I be a good person at the same time?
Yeah.
Um,
He's doing the best with what he's been given. He has choices to make that involve, how do I involve the noble traits that I've been raised with without involving the evil with which I was raised with as well. Like, and that's what makes him an interesting, likable, and relatable character, because we all can see his character growth, because we're able to see him shed those prejudices and those violent ways and learn to control himself, and yet still be a proud Fire Nation representative.
Exactly.
And that, I think, is what we all want to see in ourselves. Is
Absolutely.
we want to emerge from whatever situation that we find ourselves in, whatever hard time, we want to see ourselves emerge triumphant, but then also not necessarily unscathed, but that we've, those scars that we receive when we have bad things happen to us, we want those to become strengths for us.
Yeah.
And that's what Zuko does so
Absolutely.
perfectly.
Yeah. I think that's any thoughts I have on the subject.
I think there's always more to talk about, but might have to wait till next time.
Yeah, let's continue the conversation in the comments. If you have any ideas about what makes a character likable, relatable, or interesting, go ahead and leave a comment, like this video, and subscribe so you don't miss next video. And we'll see you next week.
Adios.